Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Stotara Satashi Shimad Stevanga Shila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai ISKCON founder Acharya Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai Namacharya Shila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Shego Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Ki Govardhana Ki Jai Shri Shri Dama Ki Jai Shri Shri Mayapur Dama Ki Jai Shri Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Jangamaya Ki Jai Gangamaya Ki Jai Jamunamaya Ki Jai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bo Shama Veda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. All glories to Sri Gaur and Gauranga. So today is the 56th anniversary of ISKCON, so I'll be talking mostly about that, but we're going to read the verse anyway through before I start. So it's Canto 3, Chapter 1, Text 32. Kachchit Buddha Svasti Anamiva Aste Svapalka Putro Bhagavat Prapanna Ya Krishna Padankita Marga Pamsusvu Achestata Prema Vibina Dariha Kachit, responsibly, Kachit, whether. Okay, go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
No, I just got into the mood of it.
Just word for words then. Kachit, whether. Buddha, very learned. Svasti, well. Anamivaha, faultless. Aste, does exist. Svapalka Putraha, the son of Svapalka, Akrura. Bhagavat, regarding the personality of Godhead. Prapanaha, surrendered. Yaha, one who. Krishna, the Lord. Padankita, marked with footprints. Marga, path. Pamsushu, in the dust. Achestata, exhibited. Prema Vibina, lost in transcendental love. Dariyaha, mental equilibrium. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Please tell me whether Akrura, the son of Svapalka, is doing well. He is a faultless soul surrendered unto the personality of Godhead. He once lost his mental equilibrium due to his ecstasy of transcendental love and fell down on the dust of a road, which was marked with the footprints of Lord Krishna. Responsibly, please tell me whether Akrura, the son of Svapalka, is doing well. He is a faultless soul, surrendered unto the personality of Godhead. He once lost his mental equilibrium due to his ecstasy of transcendental love and fell down on the dust of a road which was marked with the footprints of Lord Krishna. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. When Akrura came to Vrindavan in search of Krishna, he saw the footprints of the Lord on the dust of Nandagram, and at once fell on them in ecstasy of transcendental love. This ecstasy is possible for a devotee who is fully absorbed in incessant thoughts of Krishna. Such a pure devotee of the Lord is naturally faultless because he is always thought of the Lord is the antiseptic method for keeping oneself free from the infectious contamination of material qualities. The pure devotee of the Lord is always in company with the Lord of thinking of him. Yet in the particular context of time and place, the transcendental emotions take a different turn, and this breaks the mental equilibrium of the devotee. Lord Chaitanya displayed the typical example of transcendental ecstasy. as we can understand from the life of this incarnation of God. Actually, I prefer kookaburras to roosters anyway. That's just my personal opinion. So I have some notes that I'm going to read from to remind me of the early days of yore, of the back in the day, of the beginning of ISKCON. So I'm going to read from those, and please excuse me for not maintaining constant eye contact because I'm going to refer to these now and again. Prabhupada was in the Bowery at first before there were any temples, and the first temple was 2nd Avenue. So I went to a newsstand, which was one of the first newsstands that featured the Village Voice newspaper, and I looked through the want ads, and there was a place called 26 2nd Avenue for rent. So I made an appointment with the agent, and his name was Mr. Gardner. And it was a very warm day in Manhattan, because in the summertime, it was probably in May of 1966 or June. It gets very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter. But anyway, it was a very warm summer day, and I lived nearby, so in the Bowery. So I rode my bicycle up to 26 2nd Avenue and had made an appointment with Prabhupada and this rental agent and a man named, there was another guy who was there. I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, the arrangements were made, and this Mr. Gardner was wearing blue denim pants and a white T-shirt, and he looked to be about 35 years old. And I chained my bicycle to a parking meter, which was stolen that night because there's a lot of crime in that part of the world. And people have devices that they can cut through chains and all sorts of things. So anyway, we made an arrangement with Mr. Gardner to rent 26 2nd Avenue. And so we sat inside the building on sort of inside it was a curio shop at one point called Matchless Gifts. And the Matchless Gifts sign was still on the outside. And so we made an arrangement, and the arrangement was, Prabhupada said that I was a charter member. He used the word subscriber to ISKCON, and would Mr. Gardner be interested in becoming a charter member or a subscriber? And he said it's $20 a month, and he handed him a set of his books that he brought from India, the Srimad Bhagavatam's first canto. And Mr. Gardner was kind of impressed with the fact that he was given these books and without even asking for payment. And then Prabhupada went on to say that, well, you can become a subscriber just like these two people here are. And instead of paying money, we can just deduct it from the rent, because the rent was $100 per month. And he said, so he was going to charge him only $80. And he thought for a while, and then he said, okay, that's fair enough. So he liked the books, and he thought that was a pretty good deal. So that was the beginning. And then he said that also in this building, in this block of apartments, there are flats, I have another place. It's $80 a month, and it's just across the courtyard, and it's up one flight of stairs. And you can have that for $80 a month. So we thought, and I looked at this other person who was with me, and we thought, well, we could afford it. We'll figure out a way to pay the $100 for the 26th Avenue and 2nd Avenue, and $80 for the flat, and Prabhupada could move in straight away. So he did. I think it was a day later. There was a kind of a safari, and he had there was about 6 people that were coming to his classes on 3 days a week, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So they all pitched in and took some of his belongings, a typewriter, Robert's tape recorder, and so on. And it was about a 7 or 8 block walk up to 22nd Avenue from his place on the Bowery. So that was the beginning of Prabhupada's stay. And that was actually kind of like, it was a storefront, but it was kind of like doubled as a temple. And then, when I was still in the Bowery, I received some papers from Prabhupada with my name on them. And it had the name of Janaki, my wife, and a few other people, somebody named Green, and they were incorporation papers. And I didn't read it very carefully, what they were. It was about a 3-page document. And, but I thought, well, I'll just sign it anyway, because I'm going to just be compliant with the old man's fantasy. That was what I was thinking. So I just signed them, and then they went back to him. And what he was doing was actually incorporating, and because he understood that we all would die at some point. But if it were registered in the city of New York, it would be in their archives, and it would be an ongoing document. So Prabhupada had a vision that it was going to be a lasting corporation, a worldwide. He called it the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, which we thought was kind of a big joke, because it was just a little storefront on the Lower East Side. But that's what Prabhupada did, and that was the beginning of ISKCON Incorporated. It was called ISKCON Incorporated, or International Society of Krishna Consciousness. And then a little bit later, someone came up with this ISKCON title, that it was sort of a, not exactly letter for letter, but anyway, that's what happened. So that I just kind of thought it was kind of, an elderly man's fantasy. And one of the things, and then I told him that I had tickets to go to India. I was going to go to India to learn how to play the Indian flute. It was one of my fantasies. And as I was leaving, I heard him say in a very strong voice behind me, just see if you can start a temple when you're on the West Coast, because I was going to leave from San Francisco. So I had a drive-away car, and I went with a few people, including Jamuna, and my wife, and a guy named Maurice, and it was quite a warm summer. And we drove, and those words kept ringing in my ear. Just try to see if you can start a center when you're in the West Coast. So somehow or other, we got to the car got to part of Oregon, which is on the West Coast, just north of California, and there I met some other devotees who became devotees. That was Shamasundar, who was Sam Spirshra, and his girlfriend Malini, who is Malati now. And they're divorced, but still friends. So, and they were very impressed with the fact that we looked so different, and we talked about the Swami and this and that. And so we made a tentative arrangement to meet up together in San Francisco. He was part of the Kool-Aid acid rock test by Ken Kesey. And it was kind of like an alternative scene. And Ken Kesey wrote a book called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was made into a movie that became very famous, starring Don Knotts and a few other people. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was about a genuine place, an insane asylum in Salem, Oregon. It was based on that place. So it was sort of a bit of a fantasy drama, but it was based on a factual place. So then after leaving him, I went to a place called Klamath Falls, which was owned by Edna Howell, a house owned by Edna Howell. She was a relative of my wife, and I got a letter from Prabhupada saying that well, we were doing all right, and he enclosed a clipping from the New York Times that mentioned Allen Ginsberg, and Allen Ginsberg was very famous. And for the first time, I thought, well, maybe it's more than just an old man's fantasy. Maybe, just maybe, it's going to develop into something, because Allen Ginsberg was kind of a famous person at that time. This was in 1966, sort of near November or December. And for the first time, I thought, well, maybe it's going to develop into something. So, after signing some papers and seeing this newspaper article, I thought, well, maybe, just maybe, it's going to develop into something more. So then, somehow or other, this thought of starting a center in the West Coast kept ringing in my ears, and finally we decided to try it. And we turned in our tickets and got refunded, boat tickets to India. and decided to stay in San Francisco. San Francisco was kind of a mecca for hippiedom. A lot of school leavers and young people were coming to San Francisco because they thought that they were going to change the world. So we were the International Society for Christian Consciousness was part of that scene. We had a temple at Frederick Street, which became a laundromat later on, and it became sort of a temple. And we made it look like the place in New York, and people brought carpets and symbols and things like that to make it look authentic. And that became the first temple. And then we decided to have a rock and roll concert. And we thought for a long time, what are we going to call this event? And so we finally decided to call it the Mantra Rock Festival. It was at one of the two ballrooms that were famous. There was the Avalon Ballroom, and there was one by another ballroom that was famous at that time. Fillmore Ballroom. Yes, you were there. So there was the Fillmore and the Avalon, and so we but we tried to book it, and it was all booked out with famous rock groups like the Grateful Dead and various other people. So we had to take it on a Sunday night, and we thought, well, it's a Sunday night, people aren't going to come, but it was very crowded. People came to see what they had. We had a poster made, and a lot of people came. It was actually filled to capacity. It was so filled that they didn't let people in. There was a queue of people outside trying to get in, but they were not allowed to go in because it was filled to capacity. And one of the people who came was Augustus Owsley, who was famous for manufacturing LSD, which was very popular in those days because it was a hallucinogenic drug. And then as he approached the top, and I did a stint in taking tickets or money, and someone said, "Oh, he's Augustus Owsley. You have to let him in for free." So I didn't know anything about this, but I thought, okay, well, I'll just go along with it. And then we had a light show, and it became sort of a quasi-spiritual event. And Allen Ginsberg had turned up. We were told that we had to have a famous celebrity as part of this, part of our making this known to people. So he mounted the stage with Srila Prabhupada. There was a big stage where the rock and roll groups all played. And Prabhupada didn't say very much, but he turned it over to Allen Ginsberg. And Allen Ginsberg said that he gave about a 10-minute talk, and he was a very well-known person in those days. And then he said that if you chant with us, then you'll feel very happy. So he led a certain chant that he'd learned in India, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. I don't remember the melody. It wasn't the standard melody that Prabhupada taught us. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare, something else. So then everyone started chanting, and they all stood up and raised their arms, and it looked kind of like a wheat field. They were all swaying in a kind of a melodious way, in a graceful way. And that was the beginning. And then it was the start of, I wrote about this in Miracle on 2nd Avenue a little bit. It was kind of the start of people that were very conservative in New York, and they had called us, or we've called them on the phone, and they said, "What are you doing having these hippies come to the temple and having a rock concert?" And you know, what happened was, after the chanting got going, the Grateful Dead and other people, there was a group called Moby Grape that devotees discovered. Malati was walking down the street one day and heard them rehearsing, and she said, "Oh, they're very good." So we booked them, and they were called Moby Grape, and they always remembered that the Hare Krishnas got them their start in show business, even after some time had elapsed. Moby Grape became quite famous. So there's another story that goes along with this, and when Prabhupada was at 2nd Avenue, I don't know if it was the first time he was there, or the second time, after the Mantra Rock Festival, which took place in January of 1967, towards the end of the month, Prabhupada returned back to New York, but he got very ill. He had a sort of a mini heart attack, And the devotees in New York didn't know what to do, and Brahmananda, the late Brahmananda, tells this story about what happened. They were in search of a doctor who could diagnose Prabhupada's condition. After he survived the heart attack, okay, but he was searching for a doctor, and there was no clinics open because it was a holiday. It was something like Labor Day or something, and all the clinics were closed, were shut down. Finally, he found a doctor who was an elderly man and very disheveled looking, and maybe he was drinking, or I don't know. He didn't look like he wasn't wearing white clothes. He didn't look like an ordinary doctor. So he examined Prabhupada, and then he and Brahmananda went into another room or out into the courtyard, and Brahmananda asked him, he said, "So what's your diagnosis? You've examined him." And he said, "Well," the old man prays too much. And he said he should get out and he should get some fresh air and go for a walk. And that became the beginning of the legendary morning walks. And Prabhupada was so committed to walking that even when they were in Switzerland, sometime later, it was about a year and a half later, he walked up and down the corridor of a hotel because there was something like 2 meters of snow on the ground. It was St. Moritz. It was in the Alps of Switzerland. So Prabhupada was so committed that he did the morning walks up and down the hotel corridor. And after a while, it became such a regular thing that devotees joined him, and it became a kind of ordinary thing where Prabhupada spoke some philosophy and he gave some instruction. It became a sort of a forum for speaking about Krishna consciousness. So, and that gave the example, and Prabhupada overheard this incident with Brahmananda talking to this so-called doctor about the old man prays too much, he should get out and walk. And he said, actually he's given some good advice, and that's when the walk started, because he overheard the conversation. So this is kind of like later on Prabhupada said that he quoted Shanika Pandit saying that you have to accept wisdom even from a foolish person, and that's exactly what Prabhupada did. He said he said there were 4 things. One of them was taking nectar from a pot of poison, another was taking advice from a foolish person. So another thing happened. I went to London, and somehow or other we met the Beatles, and they asked us to record something. And when we were at Berry Place, it was the first temple in London, George Harrison came over with his guitar and put chords to Govinda Mari Purusham Tamaham Bhajami, which we were regularly singing. And then he said, well, let's make a record of this. And the Hare Krishna mantra record had already come out and it had become very famous. So then this was a little bit more sophisticated. So he hired some violinists, some cellists, some flautists, and orchestral bells and a harp. And I was playing organ, and someone else, and there were devotees singing, and some of them were playing kartals and mridangas. And then one of the devotees was playing an instrument from the Middle East called an oud. It's like kind of like a balalaika or a guitar. You may have heard it. So this recording was done, and it was done in a very, for its day, a very sophisticated studio called Trident, and it was in St. Anne's Alley, and it was known as Sin Anne's Alley. The British kind of made a little joke about this place, and it was like in a basement flat, 16 tracks. It was like state-of-the-art recording. So the recording was made in that place, and it was mixed by George and a few other people who knew music, and it became very, very successful. Not very successful, but it was successful. And people on the streets would sometimes they would say, "Oh, you're the people that made that record, Govinda." And so we'd sign our autographs, and every time we signed an autograph, we said, "Chant Hare Krishna and be happy," and then signed our name to it. So we thought, well, that was preaching. But Prabhupada was in Los Angeles at the time, and he heard that a recording was made of Govinda Mari Purusham. And but he'd never heard it, and the devotees didn't want to play it for him because it had a female voice leading the kirtan. And but Prabhupada insisted that he wanted to hear it. And at one of the readings of the deities, Prabhupada said, "Well, I want to hear that record that was made with a famous person, and why can't I hear it?" And they said, "Well, we don't have a record player here." It was a little 45, vinyl 45, and then they found one. And the only way that they could play it was if it were broadcast over the loudspeakers, big speakers in the Los Angeles Temple on Watsika Avenue. So they finally figured out how to play it and play it over the loudspeakers. And Prabhupada listened to it with his eyes closed. We thought he was, I wasn't there, but I heard this, and it's written up in one of Dhanavir Maharaj's books. All eyes were on Prabhupada, watching him. He was in a trance of some kind. And then, after about 3 minutes, it was a 6-minute recording, they watched him very carefully, and all eyes were on him in that temple room. It was a time when the deity doors had been opened, and Prabhupada had taken some Charamrita water, and we were getting ready to sing the Guru Vastak prayers, or the prayers to the spiritual master that we sing every day. And everyone was watching Prabhupada, and after about 3 minutes, we saw big tears streaming down his cheeks, and he still kept his eyes closed and didn't say a single word. But that was the sign of approval. And at the end of the recording, he said, "Now this must be played in every temple in every part of the world at the time that the deities are open, and at the time of the deity greetings." And to this day, it's still played. So that was in 1970 when that recording was made. And then in 1975, Prabhupada got a letter from another devotee who was a fairly talented musician. I won't reveal his name because he's probably thought better of this letter, but he wrote a letter to Prabhupada, and he said, "I don't think that's such a good idea to play that." And Prabhupada was in Vrindavan at the time. He said, "I think it's better if you listen to my recording and play my recording. It's better." So Prabhupada wrote him back, and he said, I have a copy of his letter. He said that you have heard something very wonderful here, and but we're playing it. I mean, it's been going on for several years, and we're playing it here and meeting Vrindavan. Why not continue to play it everywhere? And then it was a very diplomatic, very kind of friendly letter, and he signed off saying, "You're ever well-wisher." And then in 1977, when Prabhupada was very weak, that song was being played over the car radio, and Prabhupada said he was feeling very weak, that it was playing in the background. He said it took at least 1 hour. Then they inquired in that car. I was going to Conway Hall. That was a place in London where we took Prabhupada from John Lennon's house to preach every 3 days or every week, Conway Hall. And Prabhupada said it took at least 1 hour. In that car, I was singing with this tune, Govinda Mani Purusham. So they adjusted this word, George Mukunda and Tamal Krishna Maharaj says Yamuna, Prabhupada, and took up this tune. I was repeating. They were chanting within the car, coming from Conway Hall. That is intelligence, Tamal Krishna. Not to do anything new, simply to explain one's own way. Prabhupada. The song was favorite to me since very long time. That's what he said. Those are his exact words. The song was favorite to me since very long time. And then there was a pause. And Prabhupada went on to say, this album was very popular in Europe and America. And then in the letter to the person who wrote to him, saying that he should play his recording, Prabhupada said that it is not an ordinary singing, it is concert. Those are his words, it is concert. Many people are singing, so it is not bad. So that was the end of that letter to that person who was sort of disapproved of it. And Prabhupada was saying that he really liked that song, even though it was kind of a digression from a lot of, it wasn't, you could hear a mridanga, but there were bells, and there was a harp, and there were, a lot of people singing. So in a sense, I want to read something. This is from a book called Madhurya Kandambani by the American Dina Bandhu and friends who did the translation. And this talks about the stages of, this book talks about the stages of devotion: Shraddha, Sadhu, Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Anartha, Nishta, Ruchi, Ashakti, Bhakta, and finally Prema. It's from a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam and in the Madhya Lila of the Chaitanya Chaitamrita, chapter 13, verses 14 and 15. And in the book, it's written that Ruchi, which is the sixth level of advancement, it's written, Ruchi is of two types: that which depends on excellence of elements, Vastu, Vashishti, Apekshini, and that which does not, Vastu, Vasisti, Apekshini. Excellence of elements refers to an excellence of details in relation to the Lord's name, form, qualities, pastimes, and so on. For instance, a person may only experience pleasure from kirtan if it is pleasing to the ear and artistically sung. He may only relish topics of the Lord if they are delivered skillfully with poetic ornaments and qualities. He may only enjoy deity worship if the place, implements, materials, and so on are according to his fancy. A person with the second type of ruchi, then he goes on to explain what excellence of elements is. A person with the second type of ruchi will experience great pleasure even from the beginning of any performance of such practice as Shravanta and Kirtana, Shravana and Kirtana, Shravana and Kirtana. If, however, there is excellence of the elements, then he becomes extremely joyful and ecstatic. It means that he has not the slightest trace of impurity in his heart. So Prabhupada illustrated by liking this orchestral arrangement, so to speak, that he was very fond of this type of ruchi. And in Chaitanya Chaitamrita we find many passages in which Lord Chaitanya specifically liked certain singing, because people sang very melodiously, or they had a certain voice that he liked, and it's mentioned there that he derived great pleasure not only from their cooking, but from their singing, but from other people, because they had, like Radharani, had excellent ability to cook, even though they used a very sophisticated technique. Prabhupada was very fond of, and it's described in great detail what the ingredients were and who made them and what their names were and so on and so forth. So that was sort of the beginning in the early days of ISKCON, and a lot of things happened. So do you have any questions, which I'll do my best to answer, about these days of yore, or back in the day? Well, of course, I've written about this extensively in Miracle on 2nd Avenue, talked about the early days. And there was one incident that I wrote about where a man came to the temple, and he was part of what they called the bowels of Bengal, and they were brought to America from India. And they were performing at the Fillmore Ballroom, and people had to pay to see them. And they gave me a ticket, and we listened to them for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then just thought, okay, this is ridiculous, this is Maya. And then later that day, these people performed at a place called the Straight Theater, which was then the Hate Theater. It was formerly the Hate Theater, then called the Straight Theater. And all the theater seats had been removed, and it became sort of a place where rock and roll bands played. And one of the bowels, leaders of the bowels, was feigning that he was in a trance. And at the end of the kirtan, he was spinning around in a circle, kind of spinning around and around and around. And then he fell into a swoon. And many people thought he was the real, genuine article, and they started to minister him to see if he was still alive or still breathing and whatnot. And the next morning, Prabhupada asked the devotees what had happened at the Straight Theater, and they told him, and that they explained how this man had fallen into a swoon of some kind. And he said, well, you should have said, my dear Chaitanya, and then kicked it in his face. And he went like that. He kicked it in his face. And I felt very, very exonerated, because I thought the guy was a phony anyway, but that was the final kick. parting kick, so to speak, and that happened. So there was a lot of counterfeits at that time that were feigning the devotion, that were sort of counterfeits that were very popular among the people of that period in that day. Yes, you had something to ask?
Hare Krishna, thanks for such a lovely class. You mentioned when Srila Prabhupada first came to America, there was just a few of you. There was more of an adventure following this Indian man around, just in little storefronts and so forth. When did it occur to you who he really was, and when did it really blow up? Because it seemed like at the very beginning it was just a small
Well, the
group of
first
people.
realization I had about it was when I got this letter from Prabhupada with a cutting from the New York Times. It was an article written in that paper, and that was pretty much the newspaper of record, and it mentioned Allen Ginsberg. And at that time I began to think that, well, just maybe this is going to develop into something. And then shortly after that I went to England and we met the Beatles, and then everything was beginning to take shape, and many followers of Prabhupada were doing some amazing work, some amazing things. They were going to different cities, and they were opening storefronts and temples all over the world. So that was the first inkling I had. That was probably about 6 months after I first met Prabhupada, that there was something going on. And then they moved from 26 2nd Avenue to a little place across the street, and then devotees just started opening temples in different cities, in Montreal, Canada, and in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Those were some of the first temples. But then it was developing into a movement. So it was right about that time, and probably early 1967, things began to develop. Yes?
Maharaj, before Srila Prabhupada moved 26 2nd Avenue, he was living on the Bowery in the Arthur Swap, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were visiting at that time. Can you share some of your experiences with
Well,
visiting Prabhupada?
some of you have probably seen that they've made a film of Prabhupada in the Bowery, and it's kind of like, because of expenses, it's not really what it was like. It looks very bright, but it was actually quite dim. There was only one light bulb, like hanging without a fixture, hanging from the ceiling, and it lit up the whole place, and it was like 3 times the size of this room. And Prabhupada was sitting on a dais that was like a big, it was about that high off the ground. Like, I don't know what it was. It was sort of a table, and there were about 6 or 7 people that were kind of listening to what he said, and it was very hard to understand him because of his Bengali accent, and he had a big Srimad Bhagavatam in Sanskrit out before him, and he would recite a lot of verses in Sanskrit. So the whole thing was just kind of like impossible. I mean, the few people who were interested in, and I don't think there's any of them around anymore, not doing frontline work anyway. That person I was thinking of was Carl. His name was Carl, who went to 2nd Avenue, Carl Juergens. I did speak with him, and he's still somewhat involved, but not fully. But he was there, and there were a few people there, and Prabhupada used to speak, and regularly. And he had an old typewriter, and during the day he would type the Bhagavad Gita manuscript on an old typewriter. So that was our first inkling of something that was different going on. But it didn't look like it was ever going to amount to anything more than just an old Indian man. He looked very saintly and very gracious, but it didn't look like it was ever going to go beyond the Bowery. And the Bowery is kind of like a Skid Row. I don't know if you know the Bowery in Manhattan. It's like that. It's full of people that are dying and drinking a lot of liquor and flop houses, and the whole place just has an odor of urine and beer. That's what the Bowery is. And that's where Prabhupada started out, and it was a very humble beginning, and I just didn't think it was ever going to go beyond that. Yes?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, you're talking in the purport of the verse, the mental equilibrium that the devotee sometimes loses with his surrender, and you're talking about the ruchi, another level of purity and everything. I mean, you know, you would Prabhupada, and I know a Vaishnava is very careful. Well, I don't know, but I heard that the Vaishnava is very careful concealing his ecstasies. But can you tell us something of Prabhupada's sort of like what you appreciated about, you know, this is the foremost exponent of Krishna consciousness that the world's seen in recent times, of his mental non-equilibrium, so to speak?
Well, I just thought that he had a very paternal sort of relationship with everyone in the room, in the Bowery, kind of a grandfatherly aspect, and that he was very good-natured and very very sophisticated, and that he knew this philosophy very well, and he was very friendly and easy to talk to and very approachable, and probably we didn't know much more than that. I mean, these things about excellence of elements and the different kinds of ruchi kind of came in later on. But at the beginning, there was just Prabhupada and a few listeners. And at one point, when he was at 2nd Avenue, he said, "Well, now I'm going to initiate some of you." And I was walking with a devotee up 3rd Avenue, and I said, "Well, what is this initiation? What does it mean?" Because I thought it was some sort of rite of passage. You know, I didn't know what it was, and I asked him. I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I don't know. Swamiji said it means that you think of the Guru as God." And I said, "Well, that can't." I was thinking to myself, "Well, that can't be right. He can't be God." And then later on, I learned that it's as good as God, and that seemed to make some sense. That we learn about God through the spiritual master. But the way the Prabhupada explained it, or the way that it was explained to me, was that we think of the spiritual master as God, and that just seemed to be impossible. Anyway, it developed, and then he did initiate a few devotees. And we didn't know what we were getting into. And I certainly didn't, and I don't think anybody knew what it was. But that's the way it started. Ram, you had something you wanted to say?
You know, he was saying it seemed inconceivable that Prabhupada's mission was going to become international and expand. Can you, even that little story of how the Gita got printed seems miraculous. You know, that they had the record and he made them, you know, can you expand on that stuff?
The whole thing is that how it grew from very humble beginnings is kind of miraculous. Everything that happened, like there was a Rath Yatra down 5th Avenue, which is inconceivable. That anything other than a ticker tape parade for winning a war or the Macy's Day Parade would be allowed to parade up and down that street. And the fact that the Bhagavad Gita was approved by Macmillan Company was just, you know, a miracle, literally a miracle, because nothing of that kind had ever been printed before. So the whole thing just developed in a series of events that were miraculous. And that showed us that there was something there other than just an old man from India with knowledge of scripture and able to speak fluent Sanskrit and develop a relationship with ne'er-do-wells, including myself.
Apparently, they had that original album, the Hare Krishna album, before the London one that you organised, and they were selling them. You know that story?
Well, there was a recording of The Happening. It was called The Happening Record.
Yeah.
And Prabhupada speaks some philosophy, and then he chants Hare Krishna on it. And it was being sold, and it was being advertised in a newspaper, kind of an underground newspaper. And because it was in a very sophisticated environment, a recording studio, Prabhupada realized that coming to the United States was a good decision because you could do these kinds of things. And the story is that he kissed the ground of the recording studio, which was his way of saying that New York is the place where things should begin, because they have infinite resources, money, sophisticated recording studios, and so he somehow or other he knew he was in the right place. I mean, he was asked by his guru to preach Krishna consciousness in the English language. And so that was probably in about 1933 or something like that. But it was a long time elapsed before he came to America. And when he was asked why so much time had elapsed, he said, well, I had to think about it because it was a very big endeavor. And what he deduced was that if he were going to speak to the English-speaking people, that he would start in New York. And at that time, New York was the richest, the most famous, the most powerful city in the world. It still has a lot of that in it. So, yeah, I mean, at first he was kind of like thinking, well, I don't know. But then when things started rolling along, then he realized that this is the right thing. At one time he was thinking of going back to India. He was kind of, depressed about the whole thing. And he just thought, well, he would that according to Satsarupa's book, that was the thought he had. But then when things started developing and more people started coming and records were produced, then he realized that this is the place to be.
Apparently, they got an order from a man that worked at Macmillan for one of those happening records.
Say that again?
So apparently they got an order from a man who worked at Macmillan. He was just an accountant or something like that.
It's possible. I don't know, but
an assistant with Brahman to take the record to him. We're just going to post it along with all the others.
Well, one of the stories of the record was that one of the people who ordered the record, they actually ordered several copies, several hundred copies. I don't know how many were made, but it was ordered by George Harrison and John Lennon. And the story is that they were playing this over and over again on a little record player on a boat in the Caribbean, and they just kept playing it over and over again because they realized that it was not an ordinary sound. That's part of something that George Harrison reiterated. And they were singing with it until as he said, their jaws hurt. So that was kind of an event that just passed by. We thought, okay, well, the Beatles ordered 100 copies and they listened to it, and that was the end of it. And we didn't ever think that we would be recording with them. But the miracles continued. Yes?
Just interested in the connection with the beat poets at that time, and I wanted to get a discussion with those guys at Ginsberg and to understand what their interest in Krishna consciousness was, or were they just part of the crowd that were coming along.
Can you repeat your...
Interested about the beat poets like Ginsberg at the time. They were quite influential in the public, I think, at that time. My question is, do you know of their interest in that, or were they just part of the group that were flying?
Well, I think somebody like a celebrity like him was interested in, he was a sort of, but not interested in the sense that he wanted to go all the way with it. He said that Prabhupada was very conservative because he had 4 regulated principles. And Prabhupada had asked not Prabhupada, but one of his godbrothers had asked the Marquis of Jetland, at one time he was the governor of Bengal, a famous white Britisher. This devotee of Bhakti Siddhanta asked him what his interest, and he said, I want to become a Brahmin. And he said, I can make you a Brahmin. All you have to do is follow these 4 regular principles. So he told him what the 4 regular principles were, or the 3 regular principles, and the man said, impossible. So in a sense, Allen Ginsberg knew that there were certain principles that had to be observed, and he thought that if those are qualifications for becoming very intimately involved, then I can't do it. It's that I can't do anything that conservative. So it's kind of interesting that the devotees are thought of as being very liberal and being very sort of left-wing, but actually they're very right-wing. They're very conservative. They don't believe in gambling. They don't believe in meat eating.
Did they follow along a bit further than that?
Pardon?
Did they follow along and stay involved in the Krishna consciousness?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they don't follow all of them very strictly, but as time goes by, they begin to follow all of them. And Prabhupada knew that they couldn't, necessarily be very strict followers, but he encouraged them anyway, even though they had taken vows in front of the deities, in front of the sacred fire, in front of the Guru, in front of the Vaishnavas. He knew that all of them weren't going to be able to follow everything, but he encouraged them at any rate.
Thank you.
So it's kind of like a special day, and I was a little disappointed that it wasn't even mentioned in the new Govardhana newsletter, although there was a big article about the 43rd anniversary of the installation of these deities. I was a little disturbed that there wasn't even a single mention about the beginning of ISKCON, and it's on the calendar of events, the international calendar. So that's why I'm speaking about it today. I'm doing my little bit to glorify the beginnings, the raw beginnings. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.